Hello everyone and most welcome to H656, and I will address a subject that is in some regards somewhat similar, or it has the different aspect as the last lecture, or second to last lecture, the ultimate lecture 654, and then we were talking about object in space in front of a subject, and how this unspoken assumption has regulated science for 2500 years and thinking processes, and even when it comes to collision with quantum physics, some sort of compromise was made, a sort of scripture with the devil, and all contracts with the devil are inherently failed in a way, because yes, you get a good life if you sell your soul to the devil, but one time you're going to die, and what to do then? This is a bit similar actually. These compromises of not taking in the realization that we have a hidden assumption and continuing on the same path, it's causing havoc to science. It's very problematic, and a change needs to be done. And this is an odd thing. Kalle Lundahl, my dear colleague here, asked me about orders. Why is it that when you say man and woman, woman as being in second place having a lower position, why would the second place be a lower position? And how can you even tell it's a second position? And I remember that we went through Ashish Dalela 2 years ago, before the recordings of this series, in Hisingen, I think it was, in Kyllitorget. Yes. I think it even was Christmas or something. Yes, it was.
2 years ago.
2 years ago and Christmas. And then we spoke about Ashish Dalela, the enthusiast, really striving Indian, I'd say, philosopher slash genius at computers, very, very clever and incredibly broad. He had written books about Gödel's mistake. He's written books by quantum physics, at least 3, and he has also written loads of books about materialism and philosophy and religion. I know what it ends. But I found this little book at home, and I brought it. We usually go somewhere else to do these hard studies, and this one I brought because it looks like a nice book to have on the night table. It's actually, for once, quite cute as well. It's a lovely book to come home to, and maybe there's something to eat next to it. You have a nice read, and I think it's supposed to be light, hence the format. Maybe a little introduction to the great thinkings of Ashish Dalela, or what he found out. It was not that easy at all, even though it looks very harmless. It wasn't harmless, but it was actually incredibly interesting. And I was a bit surprised that he even ventured into this antedating in quantum physics and in consciousness. Because remember, Benjamin Libet, with his remarkable discoveries that the consciousness do not take a part into our actions, our decisions. It turns out that Ashish actually studied Benjamin Libet quite extensively, and he wants to put it in the format of the Vedic scriptures to sort of figure out what is happening here and why is it as it is. And no need mentioning, of course, in a way, this idea that John Libet indirectly created by his experiments. That was a huge boost for thinkers like Daniel Dennett and also the couple Chalmers in Churchland. One could say that was an even bigger push or one more push towards materialism and reductionism. And of course Daniel Dennett must have been very happy with these discoveries, because this is actually pointing to complete determinism. We don't, not even the illusion of a will is still correct. So and this was actually furthered by John Dylan Hines of here, the Max Planck Institute, which is a very famous and very well renowned institute. And it's shown that the time delay could actually be even longer. So Benjamin Libet was too kind. But Benjamin Libet has his ominous 0.2 seconds. That's when consciousness kicks in. And of course, as you all understand, that's way too late. It's long after any action taken place. No action take that long. The signals are sent and we're already moving in some way. So he looks at the whole thing from a Vedic perspective. And I think it's interesting for two reasons. For the first, outside the Western Hemisphere, object in space in front of subject assumption does not exist. And that means it's a good chance this could be a more valid explanation than the ones that Benjamin Libet made, and also Dennett, Churchland, and Dawkins. He liked this as well. He was like ecstatic when he found out. He wrote, I think he wrote about it somewhere. He was ecstatic. I know it all the time. We don't have a free will. There is in Indian tradition, in the Vedic theory of free will, instead of what the condition I mentioned before, an object in space in front of subject, they have a three-parted division that is quite different. They have observer, something that Ashish translates as approver, and then you have something that sort of see the whole thing, enjoyer called. And the particularly relevance here is the proving aspect of consciousness, the provement. So we say in Swedish, godkännande. And there is a generator of thought called the chitta. I think we remember that. All thoughts comes from chitta. And it's the unconscious repository of impressions from past experience. And that's a very broad way of expressing memory, plus a little bit what we would call cognition. And what the chitta does, it's capable of combining past experience and producing new ideas. So sort of within ourselves we have this subconscious level, and where all the experience are stored. And of course you who read Freud see that coincide a bit with the unconscious mind, the subconscious mind. And he gives an example here, which actually sounds a bit familiar. Maybe we had it 2 years ago. I did not read this book, but some of his examples turn up in several books. We can imagine a gold mountain by combining past impression of gold and mountain, and then we can have the idea of a gold mountain. The Vedas state that ideas are generated automatically from the chitta without the interaction of consciousness. It's a little bit like daydreaming, or things are popping up somehow in the consciousness, and that we all know. It's the stream of consciousness, and we are all aware of that. Thoughts are popping up. I think it's like 70,000 of them on a daily basis. And the production of ideas from the chitta is mediated by the higher levels of consciousness. For instance, time has a very big influence there. For instance, if you exercise usually at some fixed time, say 7 o'clock in the morning, thoughts of exercising will automatically arise in your mind at that time. This is very correct. You see here what it's getting at. I would like to make it a bit easier here, already here, that your mind is going in that direction. Look at what's happening. When we do things, the ideas pop up, or the thoughts are coming. I think we all recognize this. So the impressions of the chitta carry the impression of time in which they were earlier created. Earlier episodes of training, exercising, 7 o'clock in the morning, every day, or at least 3 times a week. So when the same time, or the same type of time, recurs, this thought will be once more recreated, pop up. So this view of causality requires a new view of time as well, and that is actually antedating. I won't go into antedating here, but it's fairly obvious that he's pointing towards antedating. Time in this view is semantic. He calls it semantic and cyclic rather than linear and physical. And the notion of time is necessitated by some basic problems in science, which require the inclusion of meaning in matter. One's thoughts have automatically been created by the chitta under the influence of time. Free will plays a role, and here comes the important part. Free will comes in as an approval or disapproval. So you train and different thoughts pop up. Maybe you have a special training thing in front of you. Thoughts about that training thing pops up in your head or in the thinking stream. And what happens is the approving function in mind makes a decision. It says yes or it says no. And the way of doing that, it's by putting attention to it, observing it. And if consciousness, the approver, ceases to put attention to the thought itself ceases to exist. So in the Vedic view, thus consciousness is the existential cause and not the efficient cause. That is, it does not produce the thoughts. So we have a well within us, thoughts are popping up, and within this stream of thoughts, some thoughts get attention by consciousness. They get approved by getting the intention. And those who does not get attention, they are not approved, and they disappear or ceases to exist. And this is very, very important. This is a huge difference to object in space in front of a subject. Very, very different. It makes the whole difference. And remember now, India, where the Vedic tradition comes from, does not share object in space in front of subject. Not at all. And this needs to be remembered. This won't make any sense whatsoever if you're not aware of this. It cannot be forgotten. And by speaking of forgetting, I think you have a nice terms. Could you put a pause just for a second there? Well, let's put in an example here, because this is rather difficult. An example of an existential cause is a referee who oversees a football match. Although the referee does not cause the match to come to existence, the match cannot happen in the absence of the referee. He does not cause the game, but if the referee is not there, there can be no game. This is not splitting hairs. This is a very important difference. So you can say that the referee oversees the match and permits it to proceed under his or her supervision. Consciousness, similarly in Vedic philosophy, allows thoughts by approving their existence. The essence of conscious free will is the existential, and that are not the efficient cause. Efficient cause meaning creator of thoughts. Consciousness does not create thoughts. Most scientific and even philosophical views in modern time, free will is seen as an efficient cause, that the will creates the thoughts. They claim that we have direct control over our bodies, which runs counter to the idea that mind is governed by material laws. And this is really weird. And this is one thing that, for instance, Ted Diamond pointed out. And in the Vedic view, the material laws create propositions for consciousness to approve. Or to disapprove. Conscious causality is the ability to reject what is being proposed, although not the ability to create new propositions for consciousness to approve or disapprove. Conscious causality is the ability to reject what is being proposed, although not the ability to create new propositions. So it has somewhat the same feeling, the same sense as a judge in court. He only say yes or no, guilty or not guilty. As a disapproving and an approving. And how is it approved? Well, by being recognized, by being observed, perceived. And because free will is existential, Chitta will creates thoughts prior to their approval by consciousness. It comes before. In fact, in the Vedic scheme of conscious control, there are 5 different parts of consciousness that successively help develop a thought into change. And these are called Chitta, Prakriti, Mahatattva, Ahamkara, and Shakti. These correspond to 5 ways or modes called thinking, feeling, willing, knowing, and acting. The production of thoughts from the Chitta is thinking, popping up from the thinking stream. This thought has to be disliked or liked, which is called feeling. The thought has to be judged to be good, which is called willing. One then must find a plan to fulfill the thought. And this plan is called knowing. And finally, one must have the ability to fulfill the plan and put it into doing. And this is called acting. This oddly corresponds really well to the latest discoveries in neurology. And it's a completely different model than to the one we are used to. And the interesting thing, it corresponds so well to antedating in quantum physics. And it also has a lot to say about Alexander technique. Because I come to realize on an intuitive basis, I shouldn't say I can really express it yet. It's coming to me. But this is what Alexander pointed to. That the act or the function of the mind is completely different from what we usually say it is. It has an approving tendency, a disapproving tendency, but it does not at any point make thoughts. And as you might understand, object in space before subject is saying that the conscious mind is constructing thoughts. Why is that? Well, you see something out there in the world and you have the idea that the subject is constructing a thought about that. The experience. It makes an experience. This is not the view here. It's slightly different. Coincides sometime. Of course it coincides quite a lot in normal life. Maybe 90%. But the difference is still there. It's not the same working order. It's almost as different as driving a car when you have a clutch and you have a gear and you need to use the clutch to put in the different gears. And the bicycle. Bicycle, well, if it doesn't have any gears, you just cycle. And see huge difference. If you don't use the clutch in the right order, you won't get you anywhere. And here is a different mode of consciousness. And there is a definite connection between consciousness and antedating, and also what Kalle Lundahl wanted this subject to be about. What comes first? Is it something that is second, or something that first? And how do we tell first from second? It has to do with the working process of the mind also. Mind tells us in which order things comes, but it's not the conscious mind, it's the chitta. Chitta tells us which order it comes, and that's quite different. And almost ever, when we speak about free will in everyday conversations, we do it in the sense of willing, whereby the thoughts in the mind are produced from the mind's will. I can, by force, create thinking, thoughts in my head. And it's the will that is behind it. Almost like the consciousness make the thinking. And that is not the case in Vedic philosophy. And this is so different, I don't even have words for it. But it's oddly enough very close to quantum physics. Well, what we found out in quantum physics. The conscious free will has no control of the production of thoughts, but it has a control over the continuance of thoughts. While the history of impressions is unconscious and material, the approver of these stages is non-material. Libet's experiment, which observed brain activity before conscious report of free will, have observed the effect of the chitta, which automatically generates thoughts. So what Libet, according to Ashish, looked to was not the conscious mind. It looked towards the chitta. And the chitta is incredibly much quicker than the mind. Actually, the chitta creates the whole experience. And of course that comes first. It's a little bit like saying world before mind. And not that one is less or more important than the other one, but it's an order to the things. So to speak, first comes the world, then comes the mind. And that is not the case in the general supposition in Western culture, where we have object in space in front of subject. There's a difference here. And in this happenstance, in this actual connection, that difference makes two different worlds of understanding. So to observe the brain state corresponding to the activity in the chitta, and then claim that that is an indication that free will is false, is to misunderstand the process of decision making. The Vedic theory of cognition explains Libet's experiment because decisions are presented for approval to consciousness. Their creation precedes the approval. Furthermore, in cases of learned responses where ethics, methodological and procedural knowledge has been mastered, the actual igniting of brain areas will be many, one after another. Well, it's interesting, and I read it before, Libet himself did not consider his experiment to be a denial of free will, although he drastically restricted its scope. He called it the power of veto, which is essentially correct from the Vedic standpoint. Veto is a disapproval or approval. If we equate this power with a non-material consciousness, which merely accepts or rejects the content already generated by the chitta. Libet's experiments did not study consciousness, but the creation of thought. Feeling or will as a proposal in matter, which must be accepted or denied by consciousness. These experiments don't limit the scope of the non-material conscious free will, although they do tell us that under material influence, the facts to which the non-material conscious free will can apply are restricted to the facts that the material unconscious instruments can generate. And what does all this mean? Well, it means that in Vedic philosophy, the connection between subject and object is the same thing. The thoughts we have about the world, they are the world. And these are these thoughts that Dennett and his group of people misunderstood as the conscious will. It was the world popping up. And it's no wonder they make this mistake, because it's obvious from the idea of an object in space in front of subject. There is a division there, and that division demands mind to be of a different nature than reality, completely different. It's sort of a representation. And here is not the case at all. You see them are created at the same time. What's one way of expressing it? You could rather say they are the same thing. And that's why Ashish Dalila called them material. But because how can you separate from what's coming up in the chitta from the material world? You cannot. They are the same at the Planck length. Exactly the same. At the Planck length, there's no difference between chitta, or you could call it thinking, and anything that would be res extensa. Having length, remember the Planck constant, or temporal extension. It's the same here. Exactly the same. And it is this extraordinary, of course. It's a lot of advanced thinking, and it's coming from not having a supposition in that way, not having the idea and being forced to obey unconscious rules, how the world should present itself. It does just present itself. We cannot regulate that. We cannot put up rules for how the world should behave. It presents itself. And obviously Western tradition has put in an extra stage somewhere, and that's the control of reality somehow. And the control of reality equals conscious will in the Western way of thinking. Sort of creator of thoughts, and therefore also creator of matter. And no wonder people get hysterical when they hear quantum physics. It means I can create the world. No, it does not. Because you don't have any control over the chitta. Not at all. But it doesn't mean that there is an external, non-causal world where you have no connection to. That is proven by the Planck length. And that's proven by quantum physics. So two different things. Yes, they coincide. The daily living in the Western world is very, very similar to the daily living in the Indian world. So looking from the outside, it all looks the same. They walk, they eat, they talk, they go to the toilet. No difference. But this is still a huge difference. And you need to take it to the extreme. You need to take it all the way to the Planck length. And then you will see the supposition, hidden or outspoken, will not hold when it comes to the Planck length. Stop there. And I think there's nobody who can disagree with that. And that's the reason nobody takes anything to the Planck length, where it should be situated. If we're supposed to have a reductive explanation of the world, we need to take things to the Planck length. If we stop earlier, it's just we who says, subjectively saying, we're going to stop earlier. We can't decide that. We need to go down to the matters. We need to go to what's observable, as I think Julian Barber said. Let's go to the observable. Otherwise, we will strand with absurdities. The things of absurdities that Julian Barber pointed us was the free body problem. Here we have other types of absurdities. We have the idea we have no free will, and we have the ludicrous idea that there's a separation between mind and matter. So matter lives its completely different life somewhere else. I don't know where, but it's not here on Earth. And then we have the problem with the mind not being real as well. So if we disapprove of some of the reality of the material world, we're going to lose some of the reality of the mind as well. Both polarities goes the same way. The more we try to make matter transcendental, not of the world, not of the observable, of the chitta, the more we will also make the mind more transcendental. And this is of course the historical reason for putting the mind up in the head. Used to be in the material world, in the body, often situated by the heart, and it sort of moved upwards, and in this move it was no longer situated anywhere in the body. It became transcendental. Why is that? Well, at the same time also the objects became less real. Also they were transponded to an unreal reality world. As Plato would have put it, the world of ideas, eideon, or Parmenides had something similar. They all shove the world aside and thereby shove the mind aside, and then we lose everything that is true to the world. We're becoming more and more subjective. And to be very, very harsh, to say that the world is constructing, or according to the rule, object in space in front of subject, is just something you can choose among millions of things. It's a subjective choice, and I think there's a very good reason not to accept it just because of that. We need to look at things themselves. We cannot accept on subconscious suppositions. And this is the solution to quantum physics, says Ashish Tilela. And I think he has a point there. It's a scary similarity between what Vedic literature is saying and present neurology. I checked Dalila as much as I could, and I couldn't read all of what he's written on his blog. It's very extensive. I don't know how he gets the time to write there, but it's way too much. But it doesn't seem, I can't promise that, doesn't seem that he has learned the last couple of years development in neurology, where they are saying exactly what he's saying. So oddly enough, his knowledge coming from Vedic literature coincides scary. It's uncanny how similar they are to the latest development in neurology, as expounded by Ted Diamond, for instance, and presupposed by Damasio. He also claimed that maybe It was more like a maybe. Maybe those things are coming from some source that is before matter and mind. And I'd say that Ian McGilchrist went the whole way. He is sort of hinting towards that there is a unified bottom to the whole world, and there you can't discern mind from matter. So there are, modern neurology is going that path. It's necessary path to take, because this is a position with object in space in front of subject. That would stop robotics, it would stop AI, it would stop everything. And when money is involved, as it is in AI, they don't care about all dogmas. They don't have any honor, as maybe an old scholar would say. So they just slide over the whole thing. And in this case, it's actually an incredibly good thing. We will break the idea of object in space in front of subject, because it's a very, very narrowing perspective. World needs to be much, much more flexible than that for us to be able to have any knowledge of it that are going to give us some guidance, some understanding, and some truth to the whole world. And I think that's enough for today with this. I'll get back with Ashish Dalela. It's a nice friend to revisit after 2 years. Of course, I don't know, since these 2 years he produced like 6 or 7 books. How he does it, I don't know. But all of them are incredibly interesting. So it's a sharp mind somewhere there in India. I say thank you very much for today, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you.